Welcome back to Family Health Today. I'm Dr. Jeanette Neshwat. The recent heat wave has brought temperatures to our area that are at the very least extremely uncomfortable. More than that, however, these temperatures can also be extremely dangerous. In recent days, several heat-related deaths have been reported across the United States. Joining me now to discuss the proper precautions to take in this unprecedented heat is Dr. Michael Moulton. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Moulton. We appreciate it.
It's great to be here.
Now, this extreme heat can lead to extreme danger. Why is that?
Well, the body's ability to dissipate heat depends on a couple types of things, and the major defense against heat is evaporation, and the unfortunate issue is when the relative humidity gets into the 75, 80, 85%, the efficiency of that is just dramatically reduced. And the other types of way the body gets rid of heat, convection, conduction, depend on the ambient air temperature being below 95 degrees. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to do that lately. So the body's ability to sort of dissipate the heat load has been dramatically reduced in this type of heat and humidity.
So what type of injuries can result?
Well, once the body's core temperature starts to rise, the early symptoms of heat exposure are things like abdominal cramping, leg cramping, nausea, heat syncope, or what we call sort of heat illness related issues. The body core temperature usually is somewhere between 99 and 102 or 103. So those are the early symptoms of sort of heat-related illness.
And they can be as extreme as heat stroke, where loss of consciousness and...
Right. Now, once the body temperature, the core temperature gets above about 104 degrees, then that's when organ systems start to shut down, red blood cells start to lyse, muscle tissues begin to break down, kidney failure can develop. You can have damage to the intravascular system where you get clotting abnormalities, and so it can be, as you know, a very life-threatening process once the body temperature gets into that 104 plus range.
Sure, and if someone is outdoors engaging in any sort of activity, they start getting a headache or dizzy or lightheaded or weak, they should immediately stop what they're doing and either seek care or go in a cool environment and that sort of thing.
You want to get into a place where the ambient air temperature is well below 95. Get some tepid water, theoretically by spray bottle. Get some fans over you to help to expedite the evaporation and the cooling. That's usually healthy people, unfortunately, because those are the healthy young people are the ones that are sort of impervious in their own minds to this sort of weather, and they're out there biking or working or doing the things that they do every day, and they're the ones that are exposed mostly to exertional heat illness.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially football players practicing out in this heat can be very dangerous, seeing a lot of people collapsing out on the fields.
The daytime with the football pads and the body's ability to evaporate, the sweat that you form is impeded by all the equipment, and so the football player in the afternoon sun is perhaps what would consider the highest risk for this type of an injury.
So why is it so important to stay hydrated and replenish the fluids that are lost through evaporation and sweating?
Yeah. I mean, that's your body's defense mechanism is producing sweat and evaporational cooling. Once prehydration is so important because the amount of fluid people lose when they get into trouble with heat is quite extensive. Once you lose the ability to sweat, the body's core temperature rises dramatically, and then you're already in trouble. So prehydration, if you're going to exercise in heat or plan to be out in this type of weather, you really need to start preparing the day ahead of time with proper hydration 24 hours beforehand.
So that's probably one of the best ways to prevent heat-related illness, prehydration, staying hydrated and drinking a lot of fluids before an activity, during, and even after.
Exactly. I mean, I hate to paraphrase an old Sprite commercial, but obey your thirst, and it really is so important during activity that you have frequent breaks and that you keep yourself hydrated. The amount of fluid losses in this type of weather, 105 degrees and high humidity, amazing fluid losses. So it's really a full-time job to keep yourself hydrated when you're out working in this type of weather.
And what are some of the things that people eat or drink that actually make dehydration worse?
Well, I mean, obviously there are several risk factors for sort of exacerbating this, and alcohol certainly is a huge problem. It's sort of a diuretic of sorts,
Right.
but it also impairs judgment and decreases your thirst mechanism. So it's not a good idea, obviously, if you're out on the water and boating. Probably the last thing you need is to be drinking alcohol to a significant degree. Caffeine's not helpful. Things like that. Medications are a problem. Blood pressure medications, they change the way our body dissipates heat with dilation of blood vessels. Diuretics, people who have heart disease take diuretics for edema or whatever. So, mainly medications, alcohol, things like that.
What about carbonated beverages, Dr. Moulton?
Well, I mean, the kidneys are pretty smart at sorting out, what we need and what we throw away. Really, if non-caffeinated beverages are probably perfectly fine. Water is okay to a certain extent, especially early on in with just sort of moderate exertion in this type of weather, water's fine. Now, if you're an athlete or you're competing or you're working an 8-hour day out in this heat, then you have to start replacing electrolyte solution, and that's where the Gatorades and the Powerades and those sorts of things come in.
And can too much Gatorade, for example, or Powerade, or those fluids that contain a lot of salts, electrolytes, if you will, be dangerous?
I mean, really, they're for those drinks are really for people who sort of are pushing themselves a little bit. I mean, if you have to be out in this weather for an hour or two, or you're going to do some minimal activity, water's a perfectly fine replacement solution. If you're the type of person who moves furniture all day, or you're working in the trucking industry, just out in the weather working on a road crew or something like that, then it's really the amount of sodium, potassium, and chloride you lose in just your sweat alone. It's nice to replace that with some sort of an electrolyte solution.
Sure. Do you think there should be a limit to how long one should spend outdoors in these extreme heat temperatures?
Acclimatization is really key. I mean, if you're typically kind of in air conditioning like myself, I mean, I rarely get outside, and for me to go and try to tackle a day of 6 or 7 hours out in this heat would just be really ridiculous. If young people, however, who are sort of acclimated to the outside temperatures and weather, they usually can tolerate it a lot better. So exposure really is kind of based on your underlying health, what you're used to, and then you just have to be careful about the earliest signs of dehydration, heat-related illness, and take measures to get out of the weather when you can and if you need to.
How good of an indicator is the color of one's urine in determining dehydration?
Well, it's affected by so many different things. Medications that people take have dyes and food coloring in them. So, but as a general rule, as your urine gets more concentrated, it gets a little darker. So, I mean, it's something that, if your urine is very light, and more likely if you're urinating every couple hours, that's a pretty good indication that you're keeping yourself hydrated. Diminished urine output, and then the reduction in your amount of sweat is really, those are signs that you really need to start getting a handle on your level of hydration.
I see. Now, we talked about prehydration and post-hydration earlier, but really, how much should one drink for prehydration? Does it depend on the type of activity they're about to engage in?
Well, I mean, it's unfortunately you can't bank it, so you just want to keep your tissues, well perfused, and you want to keep yourself reasonably hydrated. The kidney's really good at sort of handling fluid in such a way that it'll hold on to what it needs and throw away the rest. But if you're urinating frequently and you're keeping yourself well hydrated, the amount's difficult to say, but once again, your thirst will guide you, especially once you're out and performing these kind of activities.
And it varies from person to person, whether you're a child, whether an elderly person, whether you have any underlying conditions such as heart failure and whatnot. What should one do if heat-related injury is suspected, Dr. Moulton?
Well, I mean, obviously the first thing you want to do is there's no risk of how fast you cool somebody, and so you want to get them cooled down as quickly as possible. So, the typical things are get the clothes off, get the person removed from the environment. Spray bottles of water and large fans are very, very good mechanisms of cooling. Ice packs in the axilla, groin. That's, if people are alert, that's not well tolerated usually because it's not comfortable. Whole water immersion in ice is often used, but the problem with that is in a hospital setting, it's kind of hard to monitor how people are doing if they're in an ice bath. So typically you try to put them in a sort of a mesh bed to expose their skin to the environment, spray them down, large fans. With evaporative cooling, you can usually reduce the body temperature about 0.1 or 0.2 degrees a minute. So it really doesn't take long to do that. Oral hydration with electrolyte containing solutions, and then if they're in a healthcare setting, intravenous fluids, which are at room temperature, of course, are much cooler than their vascular system, so that will also cool you.
All right, very good. And if there's any ever question, they should always just dial 911 and seek immediate
Absolutely,
attention.
and if you find someone that you feel has heat illness, once again, you just have to get them out of that environment.
All right, Dr. Moulton, thank you so much for sharing this important information with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me.
All right. Stay tuned. Family Health Today will return in just a moment.